that. How can a physical machine not only think, but be intelligent, creative, and above all, have consciousness? That's the real tricky problem.
This problem has been intractable in Western philosophy for a very long time. Some philosophers have even argued, for instance McGinn argues, that the so-called world knot is insoluble. Now, the history of this problem really starts with the French philosopher-scientist Descartes.
There had been philosophers interested in the relation between mind and body prior to Descartes. Galen clearly identified the brain's central role in controlling bodily and mental activity. His concept of the pineal gland was as a valve or filter whose purpose was essentially to stop the brain being overloaded with raw experience. Descartes used Galen as a starting point for his own account of mind.
My understanding is really this, that he thought the mind was not amenable to scientific understanding. He thought the mind was something else, whereas the brain he saw as a machine and the nervous system as a machine. And indeed he saw the neurons as tubes with vital fluids and so on flowing through them. He saw reflexes like taps in a water system. In fact, he got this idea actually from some automaton worked by water in a park in Paris, and you trod on pedals and then the automaton moved around with the water pressure changes. And you thought, golly, that's what's happening to him when he walks around pressing the pedals. The idea was then you had to have an interface between the mysterious mind, which he couldn't look at in that sort of way, and the physical brain, which he could, and he chose the pineal gland, I understand, because it's not a divided structure, there's just one in the brain, where most of the other structures are divided across the two hemispheres, in other words, represented twice. Now, since it was unique, he thought, golly, that's the interface between the soul and the brain.
With respect to his pineal gland theory, he acknowledges Galen, but does not mention the more recent writings of 9th century occult philosopher Costa ben Luca, although these seem closer to his theory than Galen's ideas.
What is particularly interesting to us is Costa's belief in the existence of spiritus, which is not spirit in one of our senses of the word, but means a subtle body. Unlike the soul, which is incorporeal, this subtle spiritus perishes when separated from the body.
Costa ben Luca gives the following explanation how processes occur in the brain. The opening between the anterior and posterior ventricles of the brain is closed by the pineal gland. Costa describes this gland as a particle of the body of the brain similar to a worm.
Although there are obvious flaws in Costa ben Luca's account, I feel that his idea of the pineal gland having its own sensitivity of the brain or what's around it, rather like a worm, is quite an interesting concept.
The revision of the importance of the pineal gland started in the 1960s with Wertmann and Axelrod's melatonin hypothesis. It is associated with sensitivity to light, the timing of estrus and menstrual cycles, circadian rhythms and seasonal cycles, jet lag, sleep patterns, with imagination and the amounts of imagination in individual humans.
My understanding is that it can set the activity cycles of the season, so it's related to time in that sense. You can get depression in cases where there isn't enough light. For example, Swedish people get pretty depressed in the winter. So I think it sets up, as I understand it, the activity cycle, particularly the sexual cycles, through the year.
In primates, the pineal gland is situated much deeper in the brain because of the large size of the neocortex, whereas in most mammals and birds, the pineal gland is nearer to the skull. Despite having influence over a variety of effects and processes, it is joined directly to the rest of the brain only by a single neural tract. Far from appearing evolutionarily regressive or redundant, pineal glands have been and are about as common in vertebrates, backboned animals, as pituitary glands. This stands in contrast to the pineal eye, which continues to atrophy and disappear.
Descartes got rid of the idea of organising souls or fields and said the body was just blind physical mechanism with a mysterious mental activity interfacing with the body and the pineal gland.
Hobbes, Spinoza and Leibniz in particular made some very strong objections to Descartes. If a gland is a piece of matter, it's of a fundamentally different type than the mental events that were going on.
The only way, according to Descartes, that the hand can be moved is by an initial impulse from the pineal gland, which in turn has been influenced directly by the will. Without postulating some sort of psychokinetic medium between the soul, or will, and the body, Descartes' account seems untenable. In philosophy, Descartes' theory of mind was described as dualist.
In order to be properly equivalent, the two things in question must be fully interchangeable.
This point was first made to Descartes by Leibniz and is known as Leibniz's law. It is not enough to show that brain events and mental events are associated, however close the seeming correlation. For true identity, the two must be fully interchangeable. Only the brain processes can be observed by the neuroscientist, not the subjective experience of a particular human or animal.
Any fantasy or process of creating symbolic representations cannot happen to or in a purely physical body. Like can only interact with like.
We shall find out how median vision theory manages to satisfy Leibniz's law and provide a narrative account of the early evolution of consciousness. The MVT approach seems to tidy up many loose threads of Schopenhauer's world knot, including puzzles ranging through the spectrum from physics to mysticism and religion.